My husband told me he wanted a divorce on a Sunday, not a dramatic Sunday, not even a bad one. I'd made waffles that morning. The good kind, with fresh blueberries, the ones he always said were his favorite. He ate two of them, complimented them the way he always did. Perfect as usual, Lorraine, and then waited until I sat down with my own plate before he said it. I need to talk to you about something serious. I put down my fork. He didn't look at me. 41 years of marriage, and he stared at the syrup bottle while he talked. He wanted out. He'd been unhappy for a long time. He needed space to figure out who he was. He'd already spoken to a lawyer. I sat there looking at my waffles going cold and thought he spoke to a lawyer before he spoke to me. I'm 64 years old. I moved to Sarasota with my husband when we were both 32, when he took a position managing commercial real estate portfolios for a firm downtown. I gave up my position at an accounting office in Columbus to follow him. We said it was temporary, just until he got established, and then I'd find something here too. 32 years later, I was still finding something. I'd raised two kids, managed a household, volunteered at the school district for a decade, handled every bill, every insurance renewal, every contractor appointment, every holiday, every birthday, every family crisis. My husband handled his career. That was the arrangement we never officially agreed to, but somehow both accepted. His name was on the house. His name was on both cars. His name was on the investment accounts and the vacation condo in Siesta Key we'd bought 11 years ago as a retirement treat. My name was on the joint checking account we used for groceries and utilities. That was it. I didn't know that until the Sunday he told me over blueberry waffles that he wanted a divorce. His lawyer had already drawn up papers. He slid them across the table like a business proposal. The house would go to him. Too much equity to split, he said. Easier this way. The condo, too, obviously, since it was in his name. He'd keep the retirement portfolio. I'd receive a modest monthly payment, something to help me get on my feet, and I could keep my car, the older one, the 2019 Camry with 68,000 miles on it. He said he was being generous. He used that word twice. I picked up the papers. I looked at them. I set them back down. "I'll need some time," I said. He nodded, relieved. He'd expected me to cry, I think, or argue. I did neither. I just asked if he wanted more coffee, and when he said no, I cleared the plates and stood at the sink with my back to him and let the water run until I stopped shaking. That night I didn't sleep. I lay on my side of the bed listening to him breathe. Already sleeping fine, of course, and I did math in my head. I was 64. Social Security wouldn't cover rent in Sarasota, not even close. The job market for women my age, with a 30-year gap in their resume, was not something I wanted to think about. Everything we'd built together, every dollar I'd contributed to, by keeping his life running smoothly so he could focus, was legally his. I thought about my daughter who lived in Tampa and had her mother's instincts for numbers. I thought about my son who was practical and stubborn in the best possible way. I thought about the fact that my husband had been wearing a new cologne lately, that he'd started going to the gym again after 15 years of saying his back hurt too much, that twice in the past month I'd walked into the room and he'd angled his phone away from me. I was 64, not stupid. I called my daughter the next morning while my husband was at the office. "Mom." Her voice went quiet immediately. She knew something was wrong. "What happened?" "Your father wants a divorce." A long pause. "How long has this been coming?" "I don't know. Maybe I should have seen it. But honey, that's not why I'm calling. I need you to help me find someone. Not a divorce attorney, not yet. Someone who specializes in financial forensics. Someone good." "Financial forensics?" I could hear her sitting up straighter. "Mom, what do you know?" "Not enough. That's the problem. Give me a few days." Before I hung up, I asked her not to tell her father we'd spoken. She agreed without hesitation, and the loyalty in that small moment nearly broke me. I spent the next 3 days becoming a different person. I photographed everything in my husband's home office, bank statements I didn't recognize, investment summaries for accounts I'd never seen, a file labeled simply Coastal Holdings LLC that meant nothing to me. I set up a new email address from my personal laptop and sent everything there. I was methodical about it. Years of managing a household budget will do that for you. You learn to read numbers, track patterns, notice when something doesn't add up. My daughter called back on Wednesday with a name, Helen Marsh, a forensic accountant based in Tampa who'd handled several high asset divorce cases. Her fees weren't small. I paid the retainer from my personal savings account, the one I'd kept since Columbus, the one my husband had always called your little rainy day money, in a tone I'd never examined too closely until now. Helen's office was in a glass building near Bayshore Boulevard. She was in her early 50s, no nonsense. With reading glasses she kept pushing up her nose. She shook my hand, sat me down, and said, "Tell me everything. Don't decide what's important. Let me decide." I did. When I mentioned the Coastal Holdings LLC file, she went still. "Does he have any business ventures outside his firm?" she asked. "Not that he's told me." Okay. She wrote something down. "Give me 2 weeks." It was the longest 2 weeks of my life. My husband moved through our house like nothing had changed. He was almost pleasant, the kind of pleasant that made my skin crawl. The pleasantness of a man who has already left in his mind and is just waiting for the paperwork. He asked once if I'd thought more about signing. I told him I was being careful. He sighed. That particular sigh I'd been hearing for decades, the one that meant you're being difficult. "Lorraine, dragging this out doesn't benefit either of us." "I'm just making sure I understand what I'm signing," I said. Something flickered across his face. "There's nothing complicated about it." But there was. Helen called me on a Thursday morning while I was watering the back garden. "I need you to come in," she said, "today if you can." I drove to Tampa with my hand steady on the wheel and my heart going twice its normal speed. She had documents spread across her conference table. She'd brought in a colleague, a younger man she introduced as her associate. They both looked at me with expressions I couldn't quite read, somewhere between professional gravity and something like anger on my behalf. "Tell me about your husband's role at his firm," Helen said. "He's a senior portfolio manager. He's been there since we moved to Sarasota. He manages commercial real estate investments for clients." "And Coastal Holdings LLC? I found the file, but I don't know what it is." "Your husband registered it 3 years ago. It's a property management company on paper. In practice, it's been receiving referral fees and consulting payments from vendors your husband's firm uses, contractors, appraisers, title companies. Those vendors appear to be inflating their fees to his clients and splitting the difference with Coastal Holdings." The room felt very quiet. "That's a kickback scheme," I said. "I used to work in accounting." The word came out before I could soften it. Yes, Helen didn't soften it either. "And that's not all. Over the past 2 years, your husband has transferred approximately $170,000 from your joint investment accounts into accounts under Coastal Holdings. Accounts you have no access to and that don't appear in the divorce papers he had drawn up. $170,000. I did the math automatically, the way I always do. That was 11 years of my little rainy day money. That was the retirement I'd been counting on without knowing I was counting on it. When you sign those divorce papers," Helen continued, "you'd be signing away your legal claim to that money. As a community property state, Florida is an equitable distribution state," I said quietly. She smiled for the first time. "You know your state laws." "I looked it up last week. I had a feeling I needed to." She nodded. "Under equitable distribution, marital assets are divided fairly. Not necessarily equally, but the court considers contributions, including the non-financial contributions of a spouse. A 30-year homemaker has a legitimate claim to marital assets, regardless of whose name is on them." I sat with that for a moment. 30 years of being told my work didn't count, that I hadn't built anything. that the money was his because he'd earned it. 30 years of 100 small dismissals that I'd absorbed without examining. And here was a woman I'd met twice telling me the law saw it differently. What happens if we expose this? I asked. Financially, the divorce proceeding changes completely. You'd be entitled to a much larger share. Legally, beyond the divorce, your husband is potentially facing fraud charges. The kickback scheme involves his clients. If they've suffered losses, this isn't just a civil matter. He could face criminal charges, possibly. Are you prepared for that? I thought about the cologne, the gym. The phone angled away from me. The man who'd eaten my waffles and then told me he was taking everything. Yes, I said. I'm prepared. Helen filed to freeze the joint accounts the same day I retained my own divorce attorney, a woman named Susan Caldwell who had 20 years of high asset divorce experience and a reputation for not losing. When my husband came home that evening and tried to log into our brokerage account, his access was blocked. He called me from his study, voice controlled but tight. Lorraine, what's going on with the accounts? Oh, I said, from the kitchen where I was making dinner. You should probably call your attorney. There was a pause that I felt all the way in my chest. What have you done? I've protected what's legally mine, I said. What's legally ours? Dinner's at 7 if you'd like to join me. He didn't join me. He spent the next 2 hours on the phone with his lawyer. I ate my dinner alone and slept better than I had in weeks. The next morning, I found a note on the kitchen counter. We need to talk. Seriously, don't do something you'll regret. I photographed it and sent it to Susan. He tried twice more that week to get me to meet with him without attorneys present. Both times I declined, politely, with Susan's voice in my head. Anything he says to you privately is an attempt to get you to act without legal guidance. The third time he didn't ask. He sent a message through his lawyer suggesting a revised settlement, slightly better terms. Still deeply unfair, still asking me to drop any complaints about Coastal Holdings. I said no. That was when his girlfriend came to the house. I hadn't known for certain that there was someone. I'd suspected the way you suspect a storm is coming before the sky changes, just from shifts in air pressure. Her name was apparently Teresa. She was 51, trim, dark-haired, the kind of woman who wears silk blouses on a Tuesday afternoon. She rang the doorbell like she had every right to be there. When I opened the door, she looked at me with an expression I recognized, the particular pity-contempt hybrid of a woman who has decided she's already won. You must be Lorraine, she said. I'm a friend of your husband's. I was hoping we could speak woman to woman. I looked at her for a moment, then I opened the door wider. Come in, I said. I was just making coffee. She stepped inside, and I could see the surprise she tried to hide. She'd expected tears. She'd expected a shaking, defeated old woman. I was wearing a cardigan and had reading glasses pushed up on my head, and I offered her a mug like we were neighbors stopping in for a chat. I know this is hard, she started, sitting at my kitchen table. The kitchen table I'd refinished myself in 2019. But sometimes these things happen. People change. It doesn't mean the years weren't real. Can I ask you something? I set her coffee down in front of her. Are you aware of Coastal Holdings LLC? Her face didn't move, but something behind her eyes did. Because I ask, I continued, sitting across from her. Because some of the money that's been running through that account appears to have been spent on personal items. Jewelry, restaurants, a weekend at the Don Cessier back in February. And I have to be honest with you, my attorney is still working out the details of who knew what and when. It matters, legally. You understand. She stood up. The silk blouse caught the morning light. I don't know what you think you know. I know that the necklace you're wearing appears to match a purchase made 11 months ago with a credit card tied to a Coastal Holdings account, I said. I wasn't certain of that. but her hand went to her throat. And that told me enough. I'd recommend you talk to your own attorney before you talk to me again. She left without finishing the coffee. I washed both mugs, dried them, put them away. Then I sat down and let my hand shake for a full 5 minutes. Then I called my daughter. "Are you okay?" she asked. "I need you to come this weekend," I said. "Bring your brother." They both came. My son drove down from Atlanta. My daughter brought her husband and left the kids with his parents. We sat on my back porch in the October heat, and I told them everything. All of it. They listened the way I'd always hoped they would, not with panic, not with drama, but with the steadiness of people deciding what to do next. "He's not getting away with this," my son said. He said it the way his father used to say things he meant absolutely, except his father had stopped meaning the things he said somewhere along the way. "What do you need, Mom?" my daughter asked. "I need you to not contact your father about any of this. And I need you to know that whatever happens in court, I'm going to be okay. I want you to believe that." They did. I could see it on their faces, and I realized, maybe for the first time in years, that I believed it too. The court date was set for a Tuesday in January. I'd spent 2 months preparing. Helen had assembled documentation that her associate described with some professional understatement as comprehensive. Susan had filed every motion, every counter, every protective order. When my husband's attorney sent threatening letters suggesting I was prolonging proceedings unnecessarily, Susan replied in language that was technically polite and structurally devastating. The courtroom was calm, the way courtrooms are, that suspended, formal, quiet. My husband sat at the opposite table with his two attorneys. He'd lost weight. His suit fit differently. He didn't look at me when I came in, and I didn't need him to. Susan presented Helen's findings methodically. The Coastal Holdings LLC, the transfers, the referral fee arrangements with vendors, the discrepancy between my husband's disclosed income and his actual earnings. Closer to $340,000 annually, not the $210 he claimed. The judge was a man in his late 60s, silver-haired, who took notes by hand and asked sharp questions that his own law clerk struggled to keep up with. My husband's attorneys objected, repeatedly, forcefully. The judge overruled most of it. When Susan called Helen to the stand, my husband leaned over and said something to his attorney that I couldn't hear. Whatever it was, it didn't help him. Then Susan called a witness I hadn't known about, one of my husband's former clients, a physician in his early 60s who'd had a commercial property deal go sideways after using the contractors my husband recommended. He'd lost over $80,000 on inflated services and had been trying to understand why for 2 years. He'd found out about Coastal Holdings through his own attorney 2 weeks before our hearing. My husband's lead attorney asked for a recess. The judge denied it. I testified after lunch. Susan had prepared me so thoroughly that I almost felt calm. I explained the household finances, what I knew and when, what I'd found and how. I was specific. I used numbers. At one point, my husband muttered something under his breath, and the judge looked at him with an expression that suggested he should reconsider that habit immediately. When it was over, not the verdict, just my testimony, I sat back down next to Susan and she touched my arm briefly. Just a tap. It was enough. The judge's preliminary ruling came 3 days later. All marital assets frozen pending forensic audit. I'd retained possession of the house. Temporary spousal support of $5,500 monthly. My husband responsible for my legal fees, which by that point had reached $70,000. His attorney filed an immediate appeal. The appeals process took another 6 weeks. During that time, 3 things happened. His firm opened an internal investigation and placed my husband on administrative leave. The Florida Department of Financial Services was notified of the Coastal Holdings scheme. And Teresa, I learned through my daughter, had ended things, or he had. The story changed depending on who you heard it from. She'd moved back to Jacksonville. He was in a furnished short-term rental near downtown Sarasota, which I knew because the mail still came to the house and some of it was from the leasing company. My son came back for the final hearing. He sat directly behind me in the gallery, and knowing he was there made the room feel less like a battlefield. The final ruling took 40 minutes to read into the record. I received the house, free and clear, the mortgage to be satisfied from the asset division. I received 60% of all retirement and investment accounts, including all funds traced back through Coastal Holdings. I received spousal support for 12 years. My husband was ordered to pay all legal fees. The judge noted, in language that was technically judicial and somehow still felt like a verdict on a life, that my husband had engaged in deliberate concealment of marital assets, perjury regarding his income, and conduct that warranted the maximum equitable consideration toward the non-titled spouse. My husband sat very still. His attorney closed a folder. Outside on the courthouse steps, Susan shook my hand. My son pulled me into a hug that lasted longer than hugs usually do. My daughter was on the phone from Tampa, and I could hear her crying, the good kind of crying. "You did it, Mom," my son said. "We did it," I said. In the months that followed, the Florida DFS investigation concluded that the Coastal Holdings scheme had defrauded clients of over $600,000 across 4 years. My husband was charged with securities fraud and wire fraud. He pled guilty on 2 counts and received a sentence of 3 years with credit for cooperation. The civil suits from his former clients were still ongoing when he was processed into the system. I watched the sentencing from a seat in the back of the courtroom, not out of vindictiveness. I want to be honest about that. I went because I needed the ending to be real. Because for 6 months I'd been fighting something that still felt, some mornings, like a nightmare I might wake up from. I needed to see the period at the end of the sentence. When they led him out, he looked back once. I don't know what he expected to see on my face. Whatever it was, I don't think he found it. I sold the house 8 months after the final divorce decree. People are always surprised by that. You fought so hard for it. Why would you leave? But the house was full of 41 years of a life I'd been living wrong, or at least living with someone who didn't see me clearly. I didn't want to polish those floors anymore. I didn't want to look at the kitchen table where I'd eaten waffles on the last ordinary morning of my marriage. I found a smaller place on Anna Maria Island, a white house with a screened porch that faces the water. A garden bed along the south side that I've since filled with lantana and salvia and a Meyer lemon tree that my daughter helped me plant. It's mine, not ours, not his, not the product of any negotiation. Mine. I enrolled in a continuing education program at State College of Florida. Art history, which I'd always meant to study and somehow never had time for. I'm the oldest person in most of my classes, and I care about that less each semester. My son visited in March, and we drove up to Tarpon Springs for the day and ate at a waterfront restaurant and talked for 4 hours about everything except his father. At one point, he looked at me across the table and said, "You seem different." "How?" He thought about it. "Like yourself," he said. "More like yourself than I can remember." That's the thing about spending 40 years making yourself smaller so someone else can feel larger. You forget eventually what your original size was. You start to think the diminished version is just who you are. It isn't. I'm 65 now. I take long walks on the beach in the mornings, and I've started painting, badly, happily, with no particular ambition. I have dinner with a retired nurse from down the street who makes me laugh until I can't breathe. I video call my grandchildren every Sunday. I invest in my settlement conservatively, the way I'd always managed money before I let myself be convinced I didn't understand it. I understand it fine. My husband gets out next year. He'll be 73. He'll have the support payments to make, the restitution to his clients, the wreckage of a professional reputation. I don't wish him harm. I don't wish him much of anything. He made his choices and I made mine. And mine led me to this porch and this garden and this quiet life that is more entirely my own than anything I've had in 4 decades. Last week I was deadheading the lantana when my daughter called. "How are you?" she asked. "Good," I said, and I meant it the way you mean things when they're simply true. "Really good." She was quiet for a moment. "I'm proud of you, Mom. I know I say that a lot now, but I mean it. I know you do." I stood there in my garden in the Florida sun with dirt on my hands and the Gulf wind coming in off the water. And I thought about the woman who'd sat at that kitchen table with the divorce papers in front of her and thought her life was over. She wasn't gone. She'd just been waiting. So that's my story. A 64-year-old woman who was told her contributions didn't count, that she hadn't built anything, that she should take what she was offered and be grateful. I wasn't. I looked closer. I found a good accountant and an honest attorney and the particular kind of stubbornness that 40 years of being underestimated will grow in a person, if you let it. And I fought. What would you have done if someone handed you papers designed to erase everything you'd built, every sacrifice you'd made, every year you'd given? Would you have signed them? I'd love to know. And if my story helped even one person realize they have more power than they think, then it was worth telling. Please share it if you think someone needs to hear it. Thank you for listening. This is Tessa's Stories. I'll see you next time. I've thought a lot about what made the difference. Not the lawyers, though Susan was exceptional. Not even Helen's forensic work, though she found what I never could have found alone. What made the difference was a decision I made at a kitchen sink, with my back to a man who had already stopped seeing me, with water running over my hands to hide the shaking. I decided not to react. I decided to think instead. That sounds simple. It wasn't. Every instinct I had wanted to confront him that Sunday, wanted to throw the papers back across the table, wanted to say everything I'd swallowed for 40 years about being dismissed and diminished and treated like the household furniture, useful, present, invisible. But I'd watched enough of my own life to understand something. A woman who reacts gives away everything she knows. A woman who goes quiet and starts paying attention is someone they never prepare for. My husband had spent 4 decades underestimating me. He'd done it kindly at first, the way you do when you think you're being protective, then routinely, the way habits replace choices. By the end, he'd done it completely, so thoroughly that he sat across from me with a folder full of papers designed to erase my share of our life together, and genuinely believed I wouldn't know what to do about it. He thought the dependence he'd helped create would work in his favor. He was wrong about that. Here's what I learned. The choices we make quietly over years shape everything that follows. My husband made a choice to build something dishonest. Small at first, probably. A referral here, a fee arrangement there, a company name that gave him distance from the money. Each choice made the next one easier. By the time he decided to leave, he'd spent years teaching himself that rules were flexible if you were clever, that people around him wouldn't notice, that he could manage the consequences. He couldn't. That's how it works, not as punishment. Not as some outside force correcting the record, just as the simple mechanical result of the things you choose to do and the things you choose to become. And I made my own choices. I chose to look closely when everything in me wanted to look away. I chose to spend money I'd been quietly saving for years on an accountant who would tell me the truth. I chose to sit in that courtroom for the sentencing, even when people told me I didn't have to, because I needed the ending to be real in my body, not just on paper. Those choices made me something I hadn't been in a long time, someone who acted on her own behalf. The tricky thing about spending decades putting everyone else first is that it can look like virtue, and some of it is. I don't regret raising my children well or taking care of my home with pride, but there's a version of selflessness that's actually just fear of taking up space, fear of being too much, fear that your needs aren't as legitimate as everyone else's. I'd been living some of that version. Lorraine who handles it quietly. Lorraine who doesn't make a fuss. I'm done with that version. What I want anyone to take from my story isn't that you should be suspicious of the people you love. It's that you should know your own life, know your finances, know your legal rights, know what's in your name and what isn't, and understand what that means. Not because your marriage will end. I hope yours never does. But because knowledge is the difference between a woman who gets handed papers and has no choice, and a woman who gets handed papers and knows exactly what to do next. Intelligence without action is just worry. Action without honesty is just noise. But when you combine the willingness to see clearly with the courage to act on what you see, that's when things change. That's when you stop being someone things happen to and start being someone who decides what happens next. I'm 65 years old and I'm planting a garden on an island in Florida. And I'm bad at watercolors and very good at budgeting, and I have never, not once, been happier. That's not despite what happened. It's partly because of it, because I found out what I was made of, and it turned out to be more than I thought.